First of all, hello and welcome. My name's Robin Asprey. I'm the Development Manager for Southern England at Glaucoma UK. It is absolutely lovely to have you here with us today for this session. I am joined today by Professor James Morgan, who's joining us from Cardiff University. He's a Professor of Ophthalmology there and is very involved in kind of the future of glaucoma care. So he's here to share all of his wonderful knowledge and expertise with us today. I'm just to put out there as well today that we're now in the midst of Loneliness Week, and just a shout out from Glaucoma UK to say if people are feeling lonely or isolated or worried about anything, please do come to us and we can give you some support. So today's topic, changing glaucoma pathways. In a moment, I'm just going to launch the first of our polls. We've got 2 polls that we will be carrying out in today's session, just to see how much people are gaining from the session. There'll be one at the beginning and then another one at the end to find out how much you know already and how much you have learnt across the session. These really just help us show whether we're getting it right. And it's really, really important to have your feedback on these. So please do join in. In fact, I'll put the first poll up now. Where are we? I've just clicked launch, so hopefully that should have popped up on your screen. Apologies if you're on Facebook. Polling only works through Zoom, so if you do want to join in with polls, please do join us on Zoom next time, and then you'll be able to join in with that as well. We wanted to bring this session to you today because we know lots of people will have noticed changes to the way that their care is being provided over the last few years. And you know, there's a whole host of reasons why that is that James will touch on today, but hopefully this will give you a little bit of insight. I'm going to stop waffling in a moment and I'm going to hand over to Professor James Morgan, and then after he has finished his presentation we will have an opportunity for questions and answers. So if you have a question that you would like to share with Professor Morgan, please pop it in the Q&A box and I will be keeping an eye on those. If you see a question that you like or would like to know the answer to, you can give it a little thumbs up as well, and then it can bump up the list to the top, so I can make sure if there's any really popular questions, we make sure they get asked. We will do our best to get through as many of them as possible. Sometimes we don't get through all of them, but we will absolutely do our best. If you're on Facebook and you have a question to ask, please do just pop a comment in the comments box and we will add it to the questions so that we can make sure that those questions are answered as well. But that's enough from me. Lovely load of responses come in from the poll there, so thank you very much. I'm going to end the poll now and I am going to pass over to Professor James Morgan. Thank you ever so much for joining us today. Over to you.
Robin, thanks, and Melanie also for inviting me to speak. As you mentioned, there has been a huge change in how we manage glaucoma patients, and I'm sure many of you out there will have noticed this. And really, my role is to try and communicate what's going on. A little bit about me: I'm a professor of ophthalmology at Cardiff University, a glaucoma specialist. I've led the service there for some time, but with my other hat on, I'm also a clinical lead for a digital program called Open Eyes, which is an electronic record and a way of seeing patients in glaucoma. This platform is the platform that's being used in Wales and Scotland by the whole country and by all the opticians and by Moorfield. So it's as we talk today, about a third of the UK population is coming onto this platform before we include a lot of English trusts. So I'm going to be talking quite a little bit about that. I don't have any financial interest in this, by the way. It's not a pension product for me at all. It's actually something that a large group of clinicians, not just in glaucoma, but in a lot of other specialties, have got together to try and make ophthalmic eye care better for our patients. And I'm going to describe how that's transformed and changed. Other platforms are available, Medisoft and things like this, attempting the same task. but there has been a change, and you will have noticed it, and I'm going to tell you why. So Robin's going to click through as we go along, so I'll be saying next in the time-honored fashion of changing old slides. So hopefully we won't go too fast, and there'll be the Q&A at the end if I've skipped over something and not explained it in sufficient detail. So changing glaucoma pathways. So next slide, please, Robin. So just by way of background, just so that we all start from the same page, glaucoma is one of the commonest causes of irreversible vision loss. You may ask then, if that's the case, why we don't see more people out in the streets with dogs and white sticks and canes as a result of glaucoma. And that is a measure of success. It's one of those very quiet things that has worked. It's like the drains, clean water, electricity. We have a large network of glaucoma care pathways which have allowed us to deliver not perfect, but to some extent very effective glaucoma care since the 1950s. So when I started glaucoma, I noticed in the clinics, this was about 30 years ago, patients were still going blind and we would fill in blind registration forms. I rarely do that. And that for me personally is a token of success. Now in glaucoma, it's the simplest form is the condition is where you get an increase in eye pressure. Get the next click, please. And this results in stress on the optic nerve, and it scrunches the connections between the eye and the brain. These are called axons. These are little nerve fibers. They're a millionth of a meter across. They're tiny. You can't see them. They're hundredths of the size of a hair on your head, but they are so important in conveying the signals from the eye to the brain. And each eye has somewhere in the region of 600 to 800,000 of these little connections. And in glaucoma, you lose them. And our job as clinicians is to stop this process. I must say, though, as we get older, there is a natural process of just losing them as a result of age, just as our hair falls out and our skin gets wrinkly and all these sort of things happen. So you lose these fibers as the natural part of aging. And we can't do anything about that, but fortunately, nature has given us enough fibers to see us right through to the end of our days. But our job is to make sure that glaucoma doesn't steal some of those fibers. So next slide, please. So a lot of our job is spent just looking at the back of the eye. This is what we look at. This is the optic nerve. These are 4 optic nerves, and they all look a bit different. They're all normal. I'm not going to tell you how to assess the optic nerve. It takes me years to train a clinician to get experts in this process, and it is not easy. You will have seen in the press a lot of excitement over artificial intelligence and various tools to help us diagnose glaucoma, and I think those things are going to help. As with all these things, it's always more complicated than it seems, and you might read in the newspapers, but we're fully engaged in that sort of process. Having said that, the major step forward is that you should, in your clinics, all have the back of your eyes imaged by your clinician. This was not the case 15 years ago. When I started doing it, we were questioned. And we said, why do we take images? And I said that because that's the earliest way to pick up glaucoma. We no longer wait for damage to the visual field. We look at the optic nerve, and that is a great thing because we're picking up glaucoma 5 to 10 years before the time when it would cause damage and loss of vision. Next slide, please. So this is what we used to get. We still get it, unfortunately, but this is a very damaged optic nerve, and you can see immediately that the nerve is rather pale. And on the right-hand side is a plot of a visual field measurement. Many of you, I'm sure, love doing visual field testing. It's when you put your chin in that little dome, looks like a sort of hairdryer in a hair salon, and you have a button to press, usually in a room that's not air conditioned. So in the middle of summer, everybody's falling asleep and it's all a bit stuffy. It takes 10 minutes and it's not a punishment. It's actually, we need to know what's going on in the visual field. So we don't do this to make life in the clinic unpleasant. Unfortunately, we don't have a better way at the moment to measure visual field, but this is what we don't want. This is what we're trying to look to avoid. And a lot of the changes in the pathway are based around trying to stop this happening to our patients. Next slide, please. Well, it wouldn't be much use if we didn't have effective treatments. I'll just share with you one of hundreds of slides that we've got showing that lowering the eye pressure really works. And this is a study undertaken in 2000. So this is 22 years ago. This is the Advanced Glaucoma Intervention study. And there have been several other studies since addressing the same issue, which is, if we lower the eye pressure, do patients do better? And the answer is yes. This is address the issue of how low the pressure needs to be. And if the pressure is, say, 20, then you can still get progression of glaucoma. And you see that red line going up, that indicates the glaucoma is getting worse. But if you look at the green line, you can see it's not so bad, and that's when the pressure is lower. And if you look at the amber line, you can see this doesn't go up at all. And that's because the pressure is lower again. And this study was important in telling us that this target of pressure of 21 millimeters of mercury as the division between normal and abnormal is really misleading. Everybody's eye has a set pressure that is ideal for that eye. And so for some patients, it might be as low as 12. And for other patients, you can chug along quite happily at a pressure of 26. And that makes glaucoma management complicated. However, if you are getting glaucoma progression at 15, we have ways of dropping the pressure down to a level where we can stop that. So next slide, please. And of course, we initially do that with drops, but some of you will have noticed that we're increasingly starting to use laser, in particular laser trabeculoplasty, or SLT as it's known. This is not a new treatment. It's simply that its role earlier on in the treatment of glaucoma is now being fixed following the LIGHT trial, which was published in Montreal a few years ago. However, we still sometimes have to operate on patients, and I'm not going to cover that today, but we have a range of effective surgical treatments. So we have treatments that work, and that is great. Okay. The question is, who should get them? When should they get them? And more importantly, when should patients not need surgical intervention? Because that's very much the last resort and what we're focused on trying to stop. Next slide, please. So glaucoma management in 2022, we've sort of escaped COVID, and some of us have had COVID, some of us have not, but we've all been locked up in our little Zoom rooms and Zoom booths, and or staying at home and having people drop food off on our doorsteps and so on. So a lot has changed. But are the drivers for change, are the things that happen in glaucoma management a result of COVID, or was change on its way? Well, it's a bit of both. We were in the process of changing the way we manage glaucoma, but the changes were accelerated by COVID. So in Wales, we had a lot of changes coming into practice, and as soon as COVID struck, we just accelerated them tenfold because we had to. So strangely enough, there were some good things as a result of COVID, some modernization in the NHS, and allows us to jumpstart processes that were already in train. Next slide, please. So I show these two pictures, and one is the clinic before COVID, and the other is the clinic after COVID. A few more people in the right, you could say that's what the clinic looked like during COVID. But actually, I don't think, and I hope not, that we will return to the clinics on the left-hand side. I remember the days in my clinics on a Tuesday when I would have 120 patients coming into the clinic, and it would be like Victoria bus station. It wasn't pleasant for anybody, and waits in the clinic could be anything from 1 to 3 hours or longer. And sometimes somebody would be forgotten. Somebody waiting their turn would be left behind and seen at the end of clinic. And that's not right, because you want your visit to the clinic to be effective and pleasant and not a major chunk out of your life. So what's happened to make the clinics look like they are in the bottom right-hand corner where they're relatively empty? It's not because we want to stop patients getting COVID. That was why we had clinics like this during COVID. But following this, it's really because of changes in the way we manage patients. Now, this is not a uniform picture across the UK. I must stress that. Some regions are more advanced than others. What I'm going to talk about is where the vast majority of eye care systems across the UK, across the world, are starting to go. So let's have a look and see what's happened. What has been the great change that's come to us? Okay, so let's see. Is there any what's coming to our rescue to help us? So next slide, please, Robin. So it's probably no surprise to you that it's to do with computers. It's to do with the digital revolution. It's to do with the fact that almost everybody in the UK has a smartphone. Many people have iPads and tablets. We're just knee deep in technology now, whether we like it or not. It has good things, it has bad things, but computing in the cloud, just like Facebook, the platform that we're using today, or Zoom, we're using the tools. And it's no surprise that those tools have come into the clinic. What we've implemented in almost in a sort of crash style over the last 2 years has been electronic records. For Wales and Scotland, they're just platforms that cover the whole country, and they're in the process of implementation. Largest implementation in England is Moorfields. But many other trusts are engaged in this process. So the question is, what does it mean for you? Well, if I've got some screens up here which don't really mean anything, they're the sort of screens that the clinician looks like. But basically, we're putting everything in one place currently in the data systems in the hospital, but then it's all moving magically into the cloud. Now, this isn't a sort of digital heaven or digital hell or anything like that. It's simply that somewhere in the UK is a warehouse that looks like B&Q and is just full of computers. And that warehouse is connected to another warehouse. So if warehouse one is blown up, your data is not lost. So we don't have to worry about the data. It's all secure in a way that in your current hospital, there's people using paper notes. If the hospital burns down, your records are lost. So that's not a good outcome. So has this change been easy? Let's have a look. Next slide, please. Good. It's always the irony of, if you're giving a talk about the technological approaches to medicine, that the medium of talking about it can break down. Okay. Okay, Robin, do you want to fire up the slides again if you can? You're on mute, Robin.
Sorry, everybody. Yeah, apologies. It was clearly just a little much, but we're back. So sorry about that. We will carry on.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about electronic patient records. And while I'm doing that, and it's a little bit juddery, this little video, but at the top left is what my clinic used to look like about 15 years ago. And we would take a train of shopping trolleys, legitimately acquired, not stolen from Tesco's, but they're exactly the same sort of vehicles, full of notes, and then we would implement the patient record. Giving senior clinicians electronic records is always exciting. Not everybody sees them as the solution because it's change and it's hard in the middle of a clinical environment. Next clip, please, Robin. And part of our job as sort of leaders is to get everybody to the promised land. It hasn't helped that we've had a few false starts in the NHS. We've had the paperless NHS, which the health ministers announced, I think every 2 to 3 years we're going to be paperless in 2011, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. I think Mr. Javid has said we're going to be paperless this year. It takes a long time, and we've been in this business to know that actually if you start these processes, they take at least 5 years, because it's people and equipment and money. But we are now on that journey, and COVID has been an accelerant for that. And that has, if there's anything positive to come out of COVID, that's one of the things that has come out of it. So next slide, please. So we have to keep all our doctors and nurses happy. And making a change in the NHS, I always describe it as a bit like changing the wings on your plane mid-Atlantic. We can never stop the NHS. It's always grinding on, as it should do, to see patients. So we've got to change the NHS while it's running. So again, try and change the wheels on your car while you're driving on the motorway. It's that sort of experience. This is what the doctor sees with the Open Eyes platform and similar to other platforms. It's complicated and intimidating. It actually means something to us. But to you, the changes that we no longer have to rifle through 3 or 4 paper folders, trying to piece your record together. It's all in one place. We know what's happened. We even know the conversations that you may have had with a secretary, and we can message other clinicians, and so we can communicate for the benefit of our patients with other clinicians. And importantly, what we found during COVID is we can talk to optometrists as well in the community. It's just fantastic because they always have. Next slide, please. So this is the old pathway. So this is the shopping trolley pathway. One overworked and tired clinician in the NHS, seeing hundreds of patients, trying to see everybody as fast as possible, having a short consultation time, not really getting to the heart of the problem, just managing to get some of the information that's essential for the management of glaucoma. It's not good for the patient, it's not good for the doctor, and it's also not good in terms of care. So let's have a look at what we're trying to do at the moment. So what we're doing now is putting the electronic capture systems in place, and we're putting in another layer of screeners. Typically, these are opticians who are trained to a high level, or they can be junior doctors or staff grades, but non-consultant grades, who then filter the clinic and then only pass the complicated cases on to the senior clinician. So it's a case of somebody being seen in the right place by the right person at the right time. By and large, most glaucoma is fairly straightforward. I always say glaucoma is easy until it gets difficult. And when it gets difficult, it's really difficult. And that's when you have to spend half an hour talking to somebody and discussing the options of treatment. But if the glaucoma is just chugging along just fine, it just takes 5 or 10 minutes and we have to just collect a few measurements. You don't need to come into a busy, overheated clinic to get that done. Next clip, please. And the great thing about digital platforms is that we can all view the same data, and we can view it wherever we want to. Now, we can run clinics in different parts of the country. I could see patients who are in North Wales, manage them in Cardiff. People in England see patients in different regions of their county or in their ICSs or whatever care platform they've adopted. So it's transformed the way we work. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is just take you through some of the stuff in the closing slides. And I think Robin described the questionnaire at the end. You're not going to be examined on this, by the way, so don't worry, you can all relax. I'm not going to ask you to know how to manage glaucoma, but what I'll try and do is take some of the mystique out of it. But also, I hope by way of reassurance indicate that we're not making this stuff up. When we decide on a change in treatment, it's driven by data. Everything these days is driven by data. It's not opinion. It's actually what are the facts showing. And this is a plot of the pressure for a right eye of a patient. This is a patient who doesn't exist, but as a test patient. And you can see over time, and there's a time interval there of 18 years, plotted for this over 14 years. Showing the fluctuation in eye pressure. So that top plot is the variation in eye pressure. And in my clinic, when I click, this comes up. I don't have to rifle through the notes. I can see all the pressure changes instantaneously. I can see the change in vision instantaneously. And later this year, we'll be getting all the visual field. So as we slide backwards and forwards, our little mice on the screen, so we can rack back and forwards through the visual field plot. So if you remember, I showed you that early sort of rather grey and gloomy plot of someone's visual field. And there it is again on the right-hand side. And those black bits are areas of vision loss. And those are the bits that we want to stop happening in glaucoma. if I only spend a couple of seconds putting out this information, it means that I've gained valuable time to talk to my patient, to understand what the needs are, what the worries are, and to be a doctor rather than a clerk trying to piece together a fragmented set of notes from a big, large paper bundle. But this is a massive help for us. I should say all the information that we collect is put into this. Different people in the clinic will input information in different ways. So our nurses will input information, our healthcare assistants, and at the end of the day, we click a button, the letter is automatically generated, and in Wales and Scotland, it goes into a portal so that it can be viewed by all clinicians who are looking after you. So your GP later that day can see the letter. No postage, no stamps, no delays. So we've supercharged the process, and this is what's trained. This is the transformation in care. Next slide, please. So I'll just give you, just before we finish, one example of how this changes how we look after patients. When you're seen by the doctor in clinic, you'll get typically a follow-up interval of 3, 6, 9, or 12 months. And there's no real logic for that. These are numbers that are just plucked out of ancient history. And because it's the same 3, 9, and 6 months that occur in all the other clinics, non-eye clinics, you're seeing a rheumatologist or a dermatologist. It's just custom and practice, and actually it's not driven by the data. What we want to do is to see patients when they need to be seen, not when the computers that book the clinics say a patient should be seen. And what we want to do for all the patients in the service is to pluck out the patients who are not doing well. So in this scheme, technicians and opticians can collect information, visual fields, eye pressures, and they can do that outside the hospital. Our opticians are busy collecting pressures in the community. During COVID in our hospital, when we couldn't see patients because the clinics were shut down overnight, we could go through all the eye pressures in the clinic for 10 to 12,000 patients and rank them as a list and see the patients starting off with those patients with the highest pressures and going back to the lower pressures. So the patients most at need were seen first, and the patients who didn't really need to be seen, we pushed the appointments back so that they wouldn't come to harm. Now this plot is a interesting one for an ophthalmologist. The top plot is a distribution of visual field information. And basically, there's a series of bars there. The bars over to the left-hand side of the plot are patients who are losing vision. If you're at the right-hand side of the plot, you're not losing vision. And so we're only interested in the patients in the tail of this plot. So, for example, there's one little bar there that's lit up in pale blue. And that's a group of patients who are losing visual field at an alarming rate. If we click on that, we get the 32 patients that contribute the data to that plot, and we can see that some of those eyes are going down pretty rapidly, and we can click on any of those and then bring up the data on those patients. So we can survey the clinic for patients who are in trouble and then pull them into the clinic so they are seen on a need to be seen basis. So this is where we're going. This isn't actually in the clinic at the moment. It's coming into the clinics later in the year. We hope this will be available right across the UK sites that use the platform and in other platforms that don't use this sort of software. But it's a huge change in how we manage patients. So the idea is that we just survey the whole service, looking for patients who are in trouble, rather than seeing everybody on our old treadmill of 3, 6, 9, or 12 months. At the end of the day, at the end of the year, or so, what we would like to see is that tail removed so that nobody is progressing. And the advantage of this is that we can compare across clinics, we can compare across countries just to benchmark clinical practice, and finally answer a question that I've asked in glaucoma for many years, which is to say to fellow clinicians, I can see you're busy, I can see you're seeing a lot of patients, but are you doing any good? Are you actually stopping blindness? It's a really blunt question. for all the money that we spend on glaucoma, we spend about 150 million in the UK just on treatment. What are our patients getting for that expenditure of taxpayers' money and for their personal time? Are we doing any good? Well, these are the tools that are going to tell us. They're going to tell us, and the advantage is that where good is not being done, we can make things better and ensure that services are running better. We'll have outcomes, and that's so key. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, so next slide, we've gone back, I think, for some reason. So that's also well and good, and things are sort of in train to do that, and there are large investments, and that's great. Part of it is driven by the allocation of funds by the NHS. Part of it's just driven by the revolution in technology, which we've had no part of. It's just we've been fortunate to live at the beginning of the 21st century when stuff is taking off and stuff will just get better. I'm very mindful, though. I've shared with you some of the views of the clinician, but I'm very aware when I speak to patients that it's like looking at an air traffic control screen and they think, is that my glaucoma? I'll say, well, these are the tools that we use to manage you, to make sure that you're not going to lose any vision. But it's really important, and this is something where Glaucoma UK plays a pivotal role, that we get your input. So we're not just building whizzy machines, we're actually making sure that your glaucoma is careful. That's the thing that really, really matters. So one of the things we'd like to bring in the coming years is more interaction with our patients. One way we're going to do that is our secretaries and clerical assistants no longer will have to type any letters. They'll just be done automatically. And you just click, and there's no humans required to generate letters, which means there'll be more voices on the end of the phone, more familiar voices who can provide advice or guide you to see a clinician if things aren't going well. So you will have more people to talk to. Everybody's worried that when we implement this, that we will lose secretaries. No, secretaries will just work more efficiently and less humdrum work to do. But it's really important for us, particularly those leading these developments, that we explain and describe and reassure everybody that these tools are going to make glaucoma care better. So in fact, they're making glaucoma care now better. We're already seeing the effect. So last slide, please. So I always show this slide. I think it's a road somewhere in the Midwest of the US. It's a rather lonely road, I suppose, but actually I think it just describes that we're on the road and making progress. I've been managing glaucoma patients since 1989, which is quite a while now, and it's useful to look back over that period of time to see how far we've come. We are a long ways down the road now. And we're going in a good direction. There's a lot of things in the world that are going in a good direction, but there's pockets of progress. I'm always asked, have we arrived? And I'm saying, no, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. We still need to recruit more doctors. We're still going to have busy clinics in the UK, but we have much better tools. The UK, by the way, with the NHS is wonderful because we can do things. We can follow patients up in the community. We don't fight with opticians for your management as the Americans do in the US. We can identify patients with computer tags, so your data follows you through the clinic. You can't do that in the US. And importantly, we don't have to ask you for any funds. Nobody's billing you in the clinic. Well, in Scotland and Wales, you don't have to pay for your prescriptions, but most people don't have to pay for their prescriptions. So getting refills, as the Americans say, it is not an issue. So those are wonderful things, and it's so easy to forget actually all the good stuff that we have once we try and make things better. I think that's quite enough for me. I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you may have, either on the pathway or on any particular treatments that you might be interested in. So there's I'll just address as a question from Caroline. Are there any plans for patients to be able to monitor their pressures or visual fields at home or local where they live? Yes, it's a very excellent question. There are tools out there for home monitoring. Colleagues in Scotland are looking at this at the moment. You can use mobile phones to monitor your visual fields. There are some limitations with eye pressure measurements. There are devices to measure eye pressure measurements at home, but they're very expensive. And one of the things that we need to be really aware of is to be fair to everybody, that some people can afford these devices. Some people are very comfortable with using high-tech devices, but I appreciate that's not the case for everyone. So we've got to make sure that we provide a resource that everybody's comfortable with, and we don't turn up in someone's house and say, there you go, there's an iPad and you can just monitor your own glaucoma, and then we'll get the question, well, how do I switch on the iPad? Those sort of things are the practicalities that we need to raise. But I think we're definitely going in that direction when patients want it, for sure.
And what about kind of within a setting, but kind of more locally to where they live? Is that kind of something that's on the cards, or?
It definitely, it already is happening. So it's interesting. We've run community-based clinics, and we thought that everybody would want the clinics, and it's surprising. Some patients want community clinics and to be managed where they are, where they live. Other patients actually do still quite like to come to the hospital for various reasons. Maybe there's a transport link, it's easier to come to the hospital or just to come to the community. The point is that we now have the facilities to provide these local services. And we've tried and tested these over the last 15 years. So there have been lots of pilots. So we're post-pilot now, we're at the implementation phase. So and that's a big change. This is not now being queried in as a piece of research or does it work? We know it works, and we're implementing it. So and it does have some curious things. So you can be looked after by a clinician anywhere in the world now. You know, your clinician could potentially be in the Caribbean looking after you, or you could be in the Caribbean being looked after by a clinician. So it's just as you might access Facebook or Google, that's where healthcare is going. And I think that's going to be a great thing. It raises other issues of where is my data, who's looking after my data, what's the privacy. So there's lots of people working on that. But I think on the whole, the benefits considerably outweigh the disadvantages in where we see it.
Right.
I really like not pushing any shopping trolleys out of the clinic. I mean, I'm so pleased not to see those anymore.
I can imagine. We've got a question here that says, if patients need to be seen is based on IOP, how do you assess the needs of those with normal tension glaucoma?
So again, another great question. So the IOP need to be seen was a COVID emergency. If your pressures are normal, generally the rate of progression is slow, so the risk of progressive damage in low pressure patients is much slower. Typically, we view patients over a 5-year period. Patients who've got pressures 35 to 40 are going off and need to be seen, within 6 to 8 weeks at the very least, because there's a risk of progression. So the tools that you need for patients with normal pressure are different. They're imaging and visual fields, but predominantly imaging, so that we stack up the images and follow changes over time, and the images are now taken by and large by OCT, optical coherence tomography, or a photograph, ideally both, and actually some of the scanners now provide both a photograph and an OCT scan at the same sitting. In my clinic, everybody comes into the clinic and is scanned as soon as they come in the door. So we've taken that view because it's actually very efficient that we have a scan every time we come to clinic. And that's a fantastic resource. And you've probably heard of the UK Biobank, which has shown the power of scanning the back of the eye, both for the detection of blood pressure and possibly dementia and various other conditions. Its value in the monitoring of glaucoma is absolutely clear. And this has been one of the major sea changes. we think that it's always been like this, but it hasn't. In 1992, I remember speaking to a senior clinician who said, "We'll never need a camera in the clinic." I said, "But we will, we will." And now, of course, we've got them in every clinic in the high street. And now we've connected the high street to the clinic. So when we have photographs taken in the clinic, they're the same photographs that we have access to in the hospital. And that's not trivial, but it's amazing for us, really.
Great.
So Judge Thelma's asked a question. Will this new approach make it easier to treat those with multiple eye conditions in a more holistic way? Absolutely. So I'm just talking through the window of glaucoma. We're doing the same for medical retina. Basically, we're just connecting the high street optician to the hospital, to the ECLOs, so everybody can see the data. Should pressures for those who also have myopic macular degeneration be lower than other patients? Specifically, I can't answer a specific question, but in general, yes. We know myopic eyes are ones that are more fragile because the tissues are thinner, and generally they can progress at lower pressures. So, but determining what the target pressure is for a patient is fascinating, and it's based on data. So we basically look at the rate of change in the imaging parameters and in the visual field parameters over time. I usually describe glaucoma, I explain to my patients, I can't stop glaucoma. I can't stop aging, I can't turn the clock back. What I can do is put the brakes on, so it's never a problem. You know, from the age of 25, the human body is in a state of degeneration. That's life. If we all lived to be 150, I think we'd all develop glaucoma simply because of the attrition of all the connections that we're just not built to last.
It's very unfortunate, isn't it?
And what we want to do is the job really of clinicians is to make sure that everything is working to the last day. I would sort of say the best last day is one where you're doing what you love to do the most, whether it's driving a sports car off a cliff, flying, parachuting, swimming, or just tending the garden. But the point is you can see the flowers, smell the flowers, do what you want to do. And that's, but there's this long period of decline that we might have seen 100 years ago. We're trying to, you know, this sort of slope of decline, we're trying to make it more like that. Everything working up to the very end, and we've done our job. But we can't make humans immortal. It's not, that's a different question. Really hope these changes make crowded or delayed appointments a thing of the past. Well, there is an argument. You're just moving the work from one place to another. We've got to work more efficiently, and I think that's why I always show that road picture at the end of a talk. We're on a journey to get to a better place, and sometimes I'm always talking down the road. I often think it's good. Why don't we just look back at the road to where we came from? Sometimes we forget how far we've come, and I have to remind people, having, you know, 10 years ago, there were no computers in a particular clinic, and now we've got all the stuff that the clinics are quieter. We've got to demonstrate, but we can see the tools now that we are making it better for our patients. Patients are not losing vision, fewer patients are going blind. And those measurements are returned every day. Now, with a computer system like this, like OpenEye, we don't have to audit anymore. I don't say audit is dead. I can find out how people are doing in, say, cataract surgery anytime I like. See when a complication happens. I was the Chief Clinical Information Officer as interim position I had at Moorfields in 2014. And I asked the clinical director, I said, you do realize we could send you a text message every time someone has a complication in Moorfields. Would you like that? And he said, well, I think I'll pass on that one. It's not that they have a lot of complications. It's just that you can get a bit carried away and you have to pull back and give people space. But yeah, it's, I'm hugely optimistic that if we, provided we keep the NHS intact, this is one of the problems we've got at the moment, as you probably noticed. We see this problem more in some parts of England than we do in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. We need the cohesion. We don't want people fighting over care. It's not about competition. It's about delivering pragmatic, efficient services that are driven by data, not driven by opinion, driven by data.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Absolutely. No problem. We've got loads of questions, so I'm hoping we can just rattle through a few. So we've had one question that says, is this data technology only for NHS patients?
No, so it's part of an initiative run by something called the Aperta Foundation, which is basically to make this sort of stuff available to the NHS as cheap as possible. Run really by a fantastic group of clinicians I have a great privilege to work with across the UK. And by across the UK, I mean from Scotland to Wales to London to all across England. But the contractors who install the systems also install them in private facilities. We've got some private clinicians taking it up. We have some private providers in England also who are adopting it as their platform. I won't get into the sort of commercial side of things, but no, it's not. It's built for the NHS, but it's not. Doesn't stop people using it, and it's used internationally. So we have sites in Greece and Pakistan, and it's very much on a mission to go, be used wherever eye care is needed.
Great.
Its role is to be there, but driven by clinicians, not driven by corporations. We recognise the importance of commercial providers, of course, so that's essential. But this is actually something that's long talked about, but actually is a reality that this is something that clinicians have designed, and it's not one individual. It's not me or a couple of others. It's a large group, so there's continuity.
Brilliant. Another question that says, when reviewing visual fields, how do you take into account false positives?
So,
is that $1 million question?
That's a really technical. That's good. So false positives, you can put. Actually, the data is censored when it comes into when you have a high false positive rate, typically over 30%, or a high false negative rate over 50%. Then actually the data is censored in Forum, which is the software we use initially to collate the data, and then you can set limits on what you see as useful data, essentially a qualifier for the certitude with which the visual fields are showing what's going on. Now, it is absolutely true. Some patients just never quite get the hang of visual fields, and I accept that it's not easy to do. And then we'll have to rely more on other parameters, whether it's imaging or just a super tight control of the eye pressure. But there are statistical ways of giving less credence to those fields that are not very reliable. Just so you know, with visual fields, generally when you train people, the first visual field is a training field, the second visual field you think about putting in the bin. The third visual field is probably the one that you rely on. So it's not that 2 swallows make a summer, you need 3 swallows in the visual field work before we get any. So the more visual fields that we have, the better. There is a limit, but generally 3 is what we need to get a good baseline.
Great. Will pressure and field tests be carried out without any feedback being provided to patients?
They shouldn't do, no. So one of the things we like to do is when we do letters is to provide a letter. We don't always do that. And part of I accept that as a limitation. Part of it is logistical. We're in a period of great change. The way that we would like to do this, it's not done at the moment, so let me be clear, but this is where we would like to go in 2023, is to provide a portal for the patient so that you can just log in and see how you're doing. But this is where Glaucoma UK and so important, and for the other third sector stakeholders, is to say, well, I know what a doctor would like to see. That is not the same as the view of the patient. Want something that's not patronizing in its simplicity, not intimidating in its complexity, but just right for you, just right for everybody to just say, look, you don't do glaucoma to sort of run your life. That's my job. Our job is to make sure glaucoma is treated as something that's significant, that you have to be serious about it, but then it has no impact on your life. we just quickly check. And you can see where this is. This will go to a web portal where you can log in. They say, well, why isn't that there in place? And that comes down to something called deployment, that we have to get our portals in line with all the other portals for all the other hospitals. So there are various hospital-wide portals that are out there at the moment, which are, I think, very well received by the patients. So we're going in that direction. But I think realistically, it's going to be next year that we get to that.
Thank you. We've had a question that said, it's my understanding that individuals vary a great deal in terms of the pressure levels that have a negative impact. Are the pressures of individuals plotted against their own pressure trajectory in terms of whether or not they need to be seen in clinic by a doctor?
Yeah, so they're not plotted relative to anybody else. It's the individualized record. So we might survey the whole clinic. So part of really the ideal glaucoma clinic is one where nobody's drowning. If you can imagine that it's more being a lifeguard on duty by the pool, but at the moment we're taking everybody out of the pool and checking that they can swim, which is just so wasteful, because clearly if I were a pool attendant, I can see everybody swimming. What I'm trying to do is just to see somebody waving, hopefully not drowning, in some corner of the pool. And that's what I want to put out. And that's, if you understand that, then you understand what this is all about. That we've got to survey all the data. We've got 15,000 glaucoma patients in our unit, and I want to, at any point in the day, just look at the whole clinic, all 15,000 patients, and see who's in trouble. And those are the patients I'll see. Not only that, at the end of the day or the end of the clinic, we need to reduce that number to the lowest level, because then we know that we're succeeding. Strange enough, glaucoma becomes a non-event. That's another area of problem. Funders move away and say it's all sorted, you've done brilliantly, and I say, well, no, all this stuff costs money. It doesn't fund itself. We've got to make sure these are sustainable services. We don't really explain to the politicians how this all works. It's far too complicated. You're probably all chuckling when I say that. I just say, look at the blinking lights, and aren't they pretty? I'm more than happy to take someone aside and explain to you how we do all of the analysis. But actually, you don't need to know that. The point is, you just need to accept that great healthcare costs money. It's not outrageously expensive. The NHS is a brilliant vehicle for notwithstanding all the criticisms, and some of them are justified, of any large organisation. But we couldn't do this without integrated. So yeah. But to go back to your question, I've got off piece a bit. It's single plot, single patient. It's the particular patient, not the general patient, that guides our management.
Great. I think probably just a real clarifying question. We've had a question that says, will appointments in clinics be virtual or in person? So I think probably just a really quick clarification on the fact that you would still go to a setting to have your tests done, which would then be virtually reviewed by a clinician, unless you're directly under the care of your consultant.
Absolutely correct. So there is a point where physically we need to collect the data. Someone has to touch your eye, someone has to look in the eye and collect an image, and someone needs to measure visual acuity. Those things, for some, there is a move. We had an earlier question that we can move some of those things into the home environment, but by and large, for the majority of patients, these measurements will for the next 5 years, as far as I can see, be conducted at some point of contact. It's just, it doesn't need to be, your pressures absolutely do not need to be collected by a consultant. That is a terrible waste of money. Optometrists and healthcare assistants, some of the healthcare assistants using some of the automated pressure devices for just simple screening, are brilliant. We're just making the best use of the right person at the right point. I think there's a rather specific question from Melanie, actually. Is this safe? Well, I can't talk about particular cases, Melanie, unfortunately, but if you think about it, we're actually doing a virtual clinic here. We're actually doing, and I think you have to pinch yourself and say, what are we doing here? You're on a digital platform asking a mere consultant in glaucoma question about you. I don't actually have your clinical data, nor should we view it for the whole country. But you sort of get a sense of how we can do this. I have a screen just to my left here, which is my clinic. And I can turn to that and just see any of my patients in my clinic. So that question comes up on my virtual review list. Somebody will say, shall I extend the clinic to 18 months? I can go and look at the data and say yes or no. So
Right.
we're sort of on that journey. Unfortunately, we don't have the data, but this is not the place to manage critical conditions. But I think you're getting a sense of what we can do.
Somebody's asked, you said that obviously as people get older, degeneration just kind of naturally happens as well. Somebody has said, is it easy to separate aging changes from those due to pressure?
No, it's not actually. When I see patients getting to their late 80s, we definitely see some wear and tear. Quite a large part of my job is actually stopping treatment. And this is not because we're being careless. It's just quite often, particularly when we've got inexperienced clinicians coming in, they tend to see low tension glaucoma patients with low pressures and maybe a little bit of cupping who are in their mid-80s, and put them on metanopros. And it's just not required because most low tension glaucoma does not require treatment, and we only treat if it shows sign of progression. And simply because the risk of significant vision loss in these conditions is very low indeed. And of course, with these digital tools, you can demonstrate that to the patient. So quite often those screens I've shown you, I will show my patients in Cardiff. I'll say, look, it's all flat. You've been off drops. Wonderful. And one of the hard discussions I have actually during COVID, patients come into the clinic, they're thoroughly imaged. And I will say, well, actually, there's some good news here. You don't actually have glaucoma. 15 years previously, somebody was worried or concerned, couldn't quite get an accurate handle on the optic nerve, and thought, in the interest of just being cautious, putting a patient on metanopros is a good idea. Now, we can argue, you know, there are pros and cons. It's a bit nuanced. But what isn't nuanced now is with the digital imaging tools, we can say, actually, there isn't much to worry about. Unless you live to be 160 at this rate of change, you're not going to have any trouble. And that actually is a human touch. I'll bring patients in to say that, and because I think everybody's owed a bit of just, you know, a human to say this sort of stuff, because it's a big deal. You want to know that it's not a computer. There isn't some faceless computer spitting out this information. There's actually a clinician who really cares about this business, looking at all the data and trying to translate it into a digestible couple of sentences to say, it's actually not a problem. And that's a great thing.
Absolutely.
But I'm not making that up. I say it's not a problem. If you want to, I'll show you all the data. You know, I'll show you the accounts. Or, you'll go into this pathway, you'll be reviewed in the community, and rest assured, if you go off piste, you know, if there's a problem, then we'll pull you back in and we'll do more detail.
Absolutely. I'm just going to launch the last poll. There are a couple more questions that I was going to ask, but I'm going to launch the poll so people can do that at the same time, because I'm conscious we are at the end of our time. But if anyone's able to hold on for the last couple of questions, it would be great to get them answered. So really super quick. There's a question that says, can there be a mismatch between visual fields and vision loss because of the subjective nature of the test?
Yes, there can, and this is a problem, but also it's to do with the subtleties of how glaucoma affects the eye. So the changes that occur in the retina in glaucoma don't simply match the coarse visual field test. The visual field test is very coarse. The dynamic range, in other words, it's how accurately it measures the full extent of visual field loss, is not ideal. It's a disappointment to us that we really only have one major supplier of visual field devices, the ones that we use, Huntley Fields and Zeiss. They have their faults, and the testing is coarse, and they don't, eyes move. So we quite often see a discrepancy. However, we counter that by taking lots of measurements. So basically, if a measurement is noisy, by taking lots of measurements, you can take out some of the noise. But, yeah.
Right. Somebody's asked, following on from what you said about putting the brakes on, provided a patient follows your treatment or instruction, are you able to halt progression in most cases, regardless of how progressed they are when they present to you?
Sadly, not. It's a conceit to say I can stop glaucoma in the majority of cases. Now, in most cases with high pressure, or patients who have previous pressure issues driving the glaucoma, and they've got progression, we take a page out of the book of the AGES studies and drop the pressures, usually with a trabeculectomy, the surgical intervention for glaucoma, to a pressure of around 10. And I have to say, generally, that does stop things. Patients that remain a challenge for us are patients who have low tension glaucoma, typically with Raynaud's or with low blood pressure. Now, those are actually a subset of patients. Typically, you might recognize yourself in this. You'll be thin with cold hands and a history of migraine, and your blood pressure might be low, and they're more medical cases. And I think we've been aware of this cohort of patients, but actually I think one of the changes, and again, this is where Glaucoma UK comes in, is to, I think we need to start pulling them out of the regular clinic. I think they're a different group. And I don't think as clinicians we fully understand what's going on. We know sort of what's going on in the eyes to do with the blood getting to the optic nerve. We don't know the best ways to stop this. We're researching it. There's a lot of research going on in this area. Lowering the pressure does help, but I can't say with 100% certainty of we're definitely going to stop it. That would be a conceit if it was inappropriate. So there are remaining challenges. It's not, we haven't completely conquered glaucoma. We mustn't take our foot off the pedal either. So no. I'm optimistic about the future direction, but that's if we're driving hard down this road. And let's be clear, take our foot off the gas and cut services or cut doctors or whatever, we'll just go backwards. It's not you can't be stationary on that road. If you're not driving down it to pursue this metaphor to destruction, you'll just drift backwards.
Yeah. And the last question that we've got today, if we haven't had an opportunity to answer your questions, I'm ever so sorry. I am really conscious of the time. If you haven't had your question answered, please do contact our helpline. They're available Monday to Friday, 9:30 until 5 o'clock. The phone number is 01233 648170, or you can email helpline@Glaucoma UK. The last question that I really did just want to get a super quick answer to is, once you've reviewed the data, how do you see your patients? Is that virtual, in person, or by an ad hoc phone call? So I think, go on.
So it's generally how it happens. I review the data in clinic if I'm seeing a patient face to face, so that's just regular clinic appointment. We have a series of optometrists, from senior optometrists to junior optometrists, senior ones based on the hospital, junior ones based in the community. We're in the process of connecting all our opticians to the Open Eyes platform in Wales, and Scotland will be going down the same route. That's for 400 optometric practices. And that's wonderful because I can send patients out. So typically what they'll do is, if everything is stable, I don't have to get involved, and that will just be between the optometrist and the patient. We can survey the clinic. If they are concerned, then they'll send a message to me. We have an internal messaging system, which is a bit like email. So please have a look at the record. The downside for me is I just blink and another 10 messages are in my in tray, so you sort of move the workload from one side to another, but at least you're in let me give you an example. 15 years ago, to address an issue, I'd have to pull the notes from the bottom of the hospital, physically get them on a desk, rifle through them, and then report. Now there's no opportunity for delay. I get the message, I have the record, I can mount a response either back to the optician who communicate with the patient. Typically I ask the person who delivered the care to speak to the patient, so you have that personal connection. Sometimes I perceive that our patient requires just reassurance, and I'll pull the patient into the main clinic and just have a face-to-face discussion. It's not all pressure and drops and vision. A lot of it is making good medicine is actually providing justified reassurance or justified concerns to say, look, I think we've got a problem here, we've got to solve it, or we've got a problem here and these are your options, is generally what I'd say. One of them is not to solve it. I just weigh the choices. So there isn't a single answer. I have super flexibility in how I deal with it. Back in the old times, I had to do everything in clinic. Now I can just either do it in the community, do it as virtual, not see the patient at all, or if I need to, and I've got to do a phone call after this to a patient, phone a patient and just say, you know, I've had a query, but all the records are there. I can just do a phone call to the patient and reassure them. I can direct them to an optician who's in the same street. I can send a message to the optician to say, so-and-so is going to be turning up at your clinic. And then the optician will send a message back to me to say, I've seen the patient. Not only that, that pressure is then stapled into the pressure plot for that patient. So I see the whole record, as does the optician. So you pinch yourself, it's happening. It's amazing.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much, Professor Morgan. It has been absolutely wonderful to have you with us today. Thank you everybody at home for joining us. I hope that you found it as helpful and as interesting as I have. I know that I always learn so much on these as well. So thank you ever so much. Please do check out our website for our upcoming sessions. We would love to see you at some of those. And we better let Professor Morgan go off and make his phone calls to his patients. So thank you, everybody. Lovely to see you.
Thank you for the great questions. I think everybody passed the exam. Great questions. Great.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.